this part of the lab. And share my screen. Okay. Let me just clear some things around. So now this section on social psychology is actually my favorite field of psychology. You would think it would be ed psych, but it's actually my favorite field. So when we talk about social psychology, we're talking about our social world, how we pay attention to it, how we store any information, how we remember that information, who we meet, how we interact with those people. Remember when we did this section on learning, we said there were 3 types of learning. We said classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social learning theory. So here it is. We are finally to social learning theory. That's what social psychology is. So when we talk about 2 definitions again, attitudes and behavior, you want to make sure you know the difference between the 2. So a person's attitude is very unique to them. It's part of what their personality is. And remember, personality we kind of get from the nurture side. Temperament we get from the nature side. We get a push from genetics for that. And any type of learning you've had. And I'm sure you could list all the different types of attitudes of people you've ever met, people that are kind and generous and condescending and hateful, and we could go on. But a person's attitude can be a strong predictor of their behavior. And in psychology, we look for 4 critical components in order for us to be able to predict the person's behavior from their attitude. If the attitude is strong, stable, relative to the behavior, and easily accessed from memory. So let me give you an example. So let's say you have a friend who is very much into recycling and gets really, really upset that in her office they do not recycle. So every single day after work, she gets her recycling bag and she goes around to all the trash cans in her office and takes out the plastic bottles and the glass bottles and takes them home to put in her recycling bin. Okay. That is a strong attitude. Somebody's digging through trash. That's a strong attitude. Okay. Is it stable? Yes. She does it every single day. So it's stable. Now, she's also in your class and you're in a classroom with her in a school that doesn't recycle either. So you know this about her, so it's easily accessed from memory. You know this about her, so it's relative to the behavior, because do you believe she would take the recyclables out of the trash after class and take them home to put in her recycling? So we know the attitude is strong. Yes. It's stable. Yes. The situation is relative to the behavior. Now we're just talking, instead of an office, it's the classroom. And we know this already about her. So yes, you could predict that at the end of class, she would take the stuff out of the trash home to her recycling. That's how you can follow a basic pattern to predict somebody's behavior from attitude. But also we can sometimes change our attitude because of a behavior. So I'm going to pick one that's a little more not conservative to give with this one. So let's say you are the parent of a 13-year-old, and your 13-year-old goes to a school basketball game, and you didn't want her to go by herself, but she did. And she's walking home from the basketball game, and you're a very, very strict family, and you're also very much pro-life. And walking home, your 13-year-old daughter gets raped, and she doesn't say anything at first, but you notice that she's kind of depressed and she's crying a lot. And so it's not like she goes to the hospital and gets a DNC or she gets checked. Here it turns out she's pregnant. And you're like, well, we're gonna raise the baby, we're gonna raise the baby. But she is so distraught over this, she attempts suicide. She is failing her classes. She's just crying all the time. Might you possibly change your attitude for a child who has been raped? And say you would, but the possibility could be there because of that strong emotional connection to a behavior. It might be strong enough for you to change your attitude. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when we believe one thing or say one thing and do another. So we had an experiment that was done, and sorry, this was an actual research experiment that was done at a college. And in most colleges, instead of like class participation, how I do it, many colleges for intro to psych will make you sign up for doing class participation as part of being a subject in someone's research study. So this was one of these examples. So the person would come in and they were put in a little room, and there was like a glass in front of them, and they were being filmed, and they were told they were being filmed, and they had a tray, and in that tray they had spools that like thread would be on, and on the top of that spool there was just a little line that was like facing where 12 o'clock would be. And your job was to put all the spools in the pan, and they all should have the little line facing 12 o'clock. And then the experiments would start. And what you had to do for 1/2 hour, you had to turn each spool of thread to face then like what would be 3 o'clock, and turn every single spool so everyone was facing 3 o'clock. Then you had to start back at the beginning and move it from 3 o'clock position to 6 o'clock. And you had to keep doing that for the entire half hour. At the end of the experiment, you received either $1 or a $20 bill. So that's the setup. The real research is what happened next. The researcher would ask the student, look, I have to go to class. Can you please tell the next subject what they have to do? I don't want to be late. And please tell them that you liked it, because I need all the students I can get. And I know it was kind of boring, but please, can you tell them you enjoyed the task? Now, the next student coming was actually part of the research team. And what they found was 95% of the students that received $1 told the next subject that they enjoyed the task. 95% were only 5% of the ones that received $20 said they enjoyed it. They were straight out. It's like, oh, so boring. Oh my gosh, you had to sit there and turn these little spools. But hey, I got $20, and $20 for a half hour work is pretty good for a college student, you know? Let's think why. So, cognitive dissonance is when you do one thing but say another. They worked for a half hour and got only $1. I'm sure everyone in here would be really, really like, oh my gosh, why did I just sit there and do that and got paid $1? Oh my goodness. That's a half hour of my time. I must have enjoyed it. I never would have sat there and did that for $1. That was kind of relaxing. And you almost talk yourself into it because you can't imagine that you really would have sat there for a half hour and turned little spools of thread, but you did. So you want that mismatch of what you did and what you're thinking and saying to go together. So all those people that got $1 had to reason to themselves, well, I had to like it. Really, why would I have done it? Whereas the people that got $20, they're like, well, I got $20. I didn't have to like it. See what I mean? Why is that important? Because that, excuse me, that mismatch between your behavior and your feelings can really affect what you do. Okay? That cognitive dissonance can change how you think about situations, how you relate to people, how you get along with people, and how you are going to affect a situation. People who use this dissonance theory to change that difference between behavior and feelings so they match, sometimes will actually change the way they think about something that they believed was immoral before, but it's okay now because they're doing it or somebody they know is doing it. Or they minimize their responsibility for it by saying, well, everyone else was doing it. So, it wasn't only me. I was just doing what everyone else was doing. So, they're at a Steeler game and there are two Browns fans a couple rows in front, and people start throwing things at them. And normally that's something you wouldn't do, but everyone else started doing it. So you're like, oh, why not? And you throw something and you hit them so hard that they actually start to bleed. Oh, it wasn't only me. Everyone was throwing things. See, minimize your responsibility for it. We sometimes disregard that there may be negative consequences, right? Yeah, well, they could get hurt. Yeah, but everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it anyway. But the key one here, and it's the last one, and it's also a scary notion, we blame and dehumanize victims. I'm going to give two examples, and both of them are real stories to help you remember. I had a student who worked at a bar slash restaurant. Of course, this is prior to COVID. And she was in the nursing program. She had a 2-year-old single mom. Her mother was helping her so she could go for school. So her mom would watch her toddler Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. She worked. at this bar in the Strip, and I won't name the name of the bar. And she was required to wear a uniform that was very, very low cut and very, very high skirt as part of her attire. So she always brought like a pair of shorts, pants, something to put on, and, like a t-shirt or something before she would walk to her car at the end of her shift, because they had to park behind the bar. They leave the spaces out front for guests. So she was getting out at like 2:30 in the morning. So she always, and she was always very cognizant of looking around. Well, one night she was just so tired. It had been a long day and she had been studying the entire week for tests, and she just wanted to go home. And she left the bar, walking to her car, but she didn't put on her, t-shirt and her pants. And somebody was following her, and she's walking faster to her car, and she actually got jumped, and she actually did get raped. And she got back to the bar, and they called the police, and she called her mom, and her mom said, she'd wake up the toddler and come down and be with her. And when the police got there, again, true story, uh, this police officer said to her, "Well, of course you deserve to be raped. Look how you're dressed." So that's pretty bad, right? But then her mom came, and she thought, okay, her mom's going to, and her mom looked at her. First thing she said to her was, "Where's your t-shirt? Well, you know better. That's why this happened. Look how you're dressed." Her own mother. Now, who's the victim here, right? She's the victim. Who's at fault here? The rapist. But who's getting blamed? That young girl. Even her own mother was blaming her for something the actual person who did the crime was not being blamed for. We blame and dehumanize the victims. Okay? Think of, when, for some of you, you were babies, but for people who are a little older, when the stock market really tanked in 2007, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people, didn't have a place. And the same thing kind of how it happened with COVID. But people had mortgages still to pay. And, they bought this house. And, when both people were working, they could afford the $1,200, a month payment. But now they weren't working. So a lot of people had to walk away from their homes because they couldn't afford to pay them. So they pretty much lost everything. But people would blame them. Well, if you didn't buy such an expensive home to begin with, then you wouldn't have to worry about this. Well, they weren't planning on the stock market crashing either. Just like people weren't planning on COVID. How many people are still struggling and don't know? How many people have lost their businesses? But people will blame them instead of what really occurred, which it was the virus. So we do it all the time. We blame and dehumanize victims, and you'll see that in culture and society. Now, we can persuade anybody to do something if you have the right tools and the tricks. Remember when we did operant conditioning, we talked about if you can find the right reward. Well, persuasion can have a little bit of a personality push here. In other words, if you are a persuasive person and you have a persuasive message, you could probably convince anybody to do anything. Some people don't have either. Some people, couldn't sell a glass of water to a person who hasn't had water in 4 days. They just don't know how to do it. But other people could sell sand for that person to drink when they're dying of thirst. There are different methods, and we call it the central route or the peripheral route. And towards the end of the lecture, we're going to visit some commercials, and we're going to look at these commercials and how they use different techniques to persuade you to buy their product. The two areas we're looking at specifically, do they use what's called the central route or a peripheral route? A central route example would be a beer company selling their beer, showing you a commercial with people enjoying their beer and say, hey, buy our beer. Whereas peripheral route may show puppies with horses and never show the beer at all, hoping that you'll feel good about what you see and connect that feeling with the name. And as crazy as that sounds, it happens all the time and it works. And you're going to see some of those commercials today. Sometimes we have what's called the mere exposure effect. And I purposely, and I'm going to stop the share for a second, I purposely saved this bottle. This is a bottle of water from the Rivers Casino. And let's say every single time you saw me, I had a bottle of water from the Rivers Casino. Just the mere exposure of seeing this bottle with the word Rivers Casino on it could make you think, maybe I should go to the Rivers Casino. Mere exposure also works. Just think of all the people who've had superstars on their cereal boxes, who've had singers or athletes promote their shoes or any other type of product. Jimmy Fallon had a Mac on his desk, Mac computer, every single night for years. How many people, when they needed to buy a computer, were like, I really don't know what kind to get. I always see that. Maybe I should try that. Jimmy Fallon uses it. Product placement in movies. Companies pay big bucks to TV shows, movies, to place their product somewhere in the view of the audience. Because just the connection between that product and something someone likes can cause someone to go out and buy that product. Question?
Well, it's sort of kind of like a comment. I hear especially a lot of guys or people who are trying to sell you something, they always say, well, you don't see Lamborghini, they don't make commercials. And it's just like, yeah, they advertise all the time. They have movies. It's a different route, but it's still advertisement, So, but I never say anything because, whatever. But yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we market it many different ways. We may use songs in connection. We see it on a billboard or somebody sees it on a t-shirt, like they give out free t-shirts. Well, oh my goodness, it's like free advertising. Now, there are even companies that will pay you to place ads on your personal car. They're like a magnetic ad that you stick to your car. And if you drive your car so many miles a month, you get paid so much. It's advertising, and to them it's cheap, because if you're someone who drives a lot, people are going to see your car. Or if it was a school teacher, it could be a product that maybe kids would drink, like Red Bull. They're one of the companies that has done it in the past. So kids see the teacher car with Red Bull on the side. Hey, maybe I should go buy Red Bull. It happens and it works. So, even somebody just, driving through a parking lot and seeing an ad that way, it's not on TV, but it's still advertising. Good comment, very good comment. So when we talk about, get back to, when we talk about how we show these different products, it can be the central route, the peripheral route, or even just the mere exposure. We can persuade people. We said some people were very persuasive. Some have a persuasive message. If you compare these two, you have somebody who's persuasive message and they're a persuasive person, they can sell almost anything. Now, you're not tested on this one, but I put it here because people were always asking me, well, I like the field of psychology, but what kind of jobs can you get in the field of psychology? Well, I'm going to be honest. If you want to make any money in the field of psychology, you almost have to have at least a master's. The Western Psych, for their basic behaviorists coming in with a BS degree, you're going to be lucky if you make $15 an hour, and that's probably only because they all raised their rates so they could get workers. You don't get paid a lot with just a bachelor's. But with a master's, you can make money, and with a doctorate, you can make lots of money. And the field right now, the big field that's making buku bucks, would be neuroscience when it comes to psychology, social cognition. And we're talking six figures. But you are going to need a doctorate in that. And I just mentioned that because so many people ask me, I really like psychology. Yeah, psychology is great and it's very applicable to every situation in your life. But a bachelor's in just psych is not going to pay the bills. Okay. You have to go on and study a little more in a specific area, and then you can make a pretty decent wage. But it's really hard to make good money just with a bachelor's. But I put this here, not for you to know, like you're not going to be tested on it, but I put this there so you're familiar that there are parts of the field that can pay money, but it's not real easy. So, stereotypes. We all know what stereotypes are, right? We've all been experienced in some way of maybe someone having a stereotype about us or about someone else. Again, I always use myself. People are always thinking that people who are overweight are always going to be jolly. And if you ask them why, it's like, well, I don't know. You're kind of like Santa Claus. Oh, okay. So because I'm fat, I remind you of Santa Claus, and Santa Claus is jolly. Yeah, people actually do think that. Or, they think something because you're a certain color or you're, certain race or you're from a certain neighborhood. People have stereotypes. Now, not all stereotypes are bad. Stereotypes are shortcuts. But when they are bad, they're pretty bad. Okay? And because of those stereotypes, those shortcuts, Sometimes we develop what's called a prejudice. And the main difference here that you want to know is the difference between prejudice and discrimination. When we're talking about prejudice, we're talking about a thought. When we're talking about discrimination, we're talking about an action. We can prevent discrimination because we can see it. We can't prevent prejudice. The only person who can stop prejudice from happening is the person themselves. Now, we can put people in situations where we can make them to open their eyes and see that the thoughts that they may have are not true. But we can't force someone's thoughts to change. And sometimes you don't even know what thoughts somebody has. They could lie right to your face and you would never know. And there are some things in our society that are so ingrained in the culture that it may take decades or even longer to change. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but realize social psychologists have figured out, hey, there are ways to change it, but people have to be willing to change. It's like hitting your head against the wall. You're going to have a concussion before you break through the wall. You have to go about it in many different ways, but it's really, really hard to change someone else's thoughts. They have to change them. So, what we can do as social psychologists is put people in situations where they will have experiences that are opposite of their stereotype. An example: a few years ago, there was a mining accident, and it was in West Virginia. And West Virginia has some stereotypical images. Okay, and so this is the stereotype if you've never heard it before. So people from West Virginia are tend to be inbred, have no teeth, are drunk all the time on moonshine, are lazy, are dirty, they never bathe. These are stereotypes that people have of people from West Virginia, which that's horrible. You're labeling everyone from West Virginia and you're saying this is what they fall into. And that's with any time people have like a category type of prejudice, all whites, all blacks, all people of Asian descent, you're labeling everyone in a category. So there was this mining accident, and one of our local TV stations, I won't say which one, went down to West Virginia to cover it. Now, you have people right here in Pittsburgh that have that stereotype about people in West Virginia. Here would have been a wonderful opportunity for this TV station to show educated people from West Virginia talking in educated ways, explaining the situation, etc. And that could, oh, wow, I didn't realize, this, and could kind of chip away at that stereotype. But oh no, this TV station had their opportunity to ask engineers, the governor, the mayor, council people, just general family members there. Who did they ask to interview first? And I'm not kidding with this. They asked Billy Bob, that was really his name, Billy Bob, who was slurring his words, looked like he hadn't bathed in 5 years, missing 2 teeth in the front. And he talked like this. Well, I don't know what happened, but he set back people from West Virginia 20 years because the research shows it will take 10 positive images of people from West Virginia to balance out that one negative image that everyone just saw on this TV station. And they repeated that story multiple times, right? You watch it at this in the morning, you watch it at 12 o'clock, you watch it at 6 o'clock, you watch it at 11 o'clock. 10 times, 10 positive experiences to balance out that one negative experience. Same thing happens in a teenager. Did you ever, or anybody in here, if you ever gone into a store and because of who you are, they follow you around the store, or they're like checking you. They're not checking other people, they're checking you. I worked for Spencer's for a while when I first started teaching, because that meant I always knew what teenagers were into. So it was great, And I'll never forget the district manager coming in to teach us how to steal, because they figured if we knew how people steal, then we would know what to look for. And, one of the comments he made was, well, you got to check all the teenagers because teenagers steal. I'm like, excuse me, I teach teenagers and not all teenagers steal. Everyone can steal. It's a choice that people make. It's not teenagers. But that was his stereotype that he was projecting on all those people. It's like, well, in my experience. Well, I said, in my experience, I'm telling you, not all teenagers steal. We got a problem here when you're saying, but if you pull up the cameras, I'm sure you can find just as many adults that steal. But you're not saying that to all these people. So when we talk about getting rid of prejudice, discrimination you can get rid of because it's blatant. People can see it and then do something about it. But you can't change thoughts. Only people who choose do that.
So discrimination, you say that we can get rid of, but how? Like with everything that's going on in the world today, how is it that we can get rid of discrimination? I mean, it's been going on for 400 plus years with the Black culture, so how is that possible to get rid of discrimination with like I said, everything that's going on in today with the George Floyd and all of that that's going on?
But
you would think people would see
who are now aware of it that they may not have been aware of before, because it's finally getting to news media, finally being shown out in the open, where before it was hidden. So we're starting. Now, I didn't say it's going to happen overnight. Nothing happens overnight and when you're working with people, but at least there's a start.
Well, even with it being out in the media,
a long way, but we're not done.
Even with it being out in the media, you still have people who try to be like, all right, well, he probably deserved it, or he probably did this, or he probably did that. And they don't know any of the situation that happened, because myself, I was in a situation myself where that happened, and I did nothing wrong until videos came out and all the facts came out and everything like that. But beforehand, I had people all over Facebook or something, all over Facebook and social media saying, well, he probably deserved it. or like just because of the color of my skin,
And
you know, and I never really experienced any type of racism until I moved to Pittsburgh.
so what you just said just proved my point. You can't change people's attitudes. So you can't change a prejudice. But if we see something that's done and it's wrong, we can make a change to that. But all those people on social media that said things about you because of the color of your skin, those are attitudes. And the only person who can change an attitude is the person who has the attitude. But if we see that take place, there are enough people that don't have that attitude can work to change at least the action. We can't change somebody else's thoughts. We can hope that we make them aware of situations that are different from their stereotype or their prejudicial ideas, that we can get them to change their own ideas. But you're right, you're perfectly right. We can't do this all by ourselves. You have to try to get people to want to change. Now, you're right, we have had prejudice eons, but it's one person at a time. So if every single day one person changes their attitude, and the next day maybe it's two, and the next day it's four, and the next day it's eight, there will come a time that many people will no longer think that way. Will we ever change everyone's? No, I wish I could say we could.
Well,
But
it just sucks
more
because
hope.
in order for people to really realize how this world works and how they are racist people out there still till this day in 2021, which is ridiculous to me. It's just crazy that they, in order for them to realize this, that someone has to die.
Yeah, and
It's a shame.
it's happening and been happening for years and years and years, but it hasn't had the stage before that now people who were not aware of it, who were not in the situation like you were, even knew it was going on. They may have heard something or somebody said something, but because they never experienced it themselves, they would blame the victim. Think of what we just talked about. They would blame the victim. It's the victim's fault when it isn't the victim. It's something that happened or someone else who did it, but you have to start somewhere. And at least we've started. We're nowhere close to ending.
No, not at
but
all. Not at all.
We at least have started. It is going to take, I mean, I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime. I'm 62. I'm hoping, you know, your children will have a different world.
Yeah, I pray that, but we'll see.
And we can only, like I said, we can only go one person at a time. And I truly believe if you start one person at a time, we can make a difference. People don't think one person it makes a difference, but that one person tells another person, that person tells another person, and it has a ripple effect, just like skipping a stone on a lake. You don't know where it's going to end up, but you have to at least be willing to start it. But you can't assume just because somebody says something that that's actually what they believe, because you may, you know, have a politician or someone who said, oh yeah, I think that, you know, racism's wrong. You don't know what they're actually thinking. So the goal is to try to connect with their emotions.
Yeah, I mean, you see that. Yeah, you
Try
definitely you see
to
that a lot.
change their attitude.
You see that a lot. You have people who come in front of you or enter into your life, and they're good. You think they're good people until something rubs them the wrong way, and then their true colors actually come out.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'll say that just like you mentioned that you have to see 10 positive examples of a prejudice or of the opposite of the prejudice to change it. And so I mean, I do think that like white people in power are now actually putting these things in the media and allowing this stuff to be seen. And so the more that it is seen, that hopefully it is, I don't know, it gains more traction. But yeah, no, Pittsburgh's real racist. So sorry about that. But and I mean, just on my personal opinion on it is that I just keep getting in fights with family members because I can safely do that without, because I can say the things and call it out because a lot of people have a tendency to test their prejudices out in what they think are safe spaces. And if, it's not.
Right. And it's also more so it's not white people in power that are making these videos. It's just the public in general with social media at like all these platforms that we have. They're allowed to videotape everything. So as soon as it gets on a certain platform, then that's when it goes everywhere and it goes viral. So it's not more so people that are in power that's putting these video out. It's certain people who don't agree with what's going on. You have that half, and then you have the other half where they want to question what that person did beforehand. Like if you see someone getting beat to a pulp, it's not question like, yeah, I understand, like, all right, if they're a threat to the police or anybody else, all right, I get that. But if they're not doing anything beforehand and they're getting hurt and they're getting their head stomped in or kicked in by the police or whatever, or their knee on their neck, stuff like that, then it doesn't matter. Like that's abuse of force, that's excessive force.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's an important aspect of social psychology is looking at how we deal with the social world and social environment. And it's something that's part of your everyday life. But it is something that people are taking a step to try to change. But again, it's just one person at a time. And I wish I could say it was more than that, but it's one person at a time. And that's what the research actually shows. That
I have a question real quick.
change is one person at a time. Yes.
I may have missed this in terms of when you were talking about careers and stuff, but like what he was just talking about, like the police cases with things like this, what are the careers like going into like the courtrooms and stuff? Do they take that into a factor, or do they just hire people to come in that are already psychologists, or are there people that already go into court and talk about like the psychology of why people do, like if it plays a factor into this stuff?
Well,
You know?
I mean, if you're talking about how do they choose people who would do that, hopefully people choose people who have some documentation or education behind them. But the person that somebody interviews or the person that they bring into a courtroom many times is based on who the lawyer is and
Yeah.
who they get to say what they want them to say. When it's coming from the justice system themselves, they're supposed to take someone who is educated in a particular field, etc. If it's something that has to do with forensics, they're looking at a forensic scientist, someone who may be a profiler. If it's something that would be a criminal act, someone who's murdering people following a pattern, things like that. But yeah, you don't know. I mean, you don't know sure, because in many cases, when they're pulling a psychologist into a courtroom, it's typically the lawyer who finds a psychologist who's going to share information that backs their case up.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, good discussion. Let me get back to this.
Hey, Professor,
Yes.
um, so I know we've been talking about this a lot. It's important, but out during our assignments, well, I guess one of the things I remember reading during the exercises, I'm not sure who it was, if it was Zimbardo or Amy Cuddy, but they were talking about racism. You know, could racism in general be a genetical disposition? Um, and that was interesting because there are tests that you can do to determine. I'm not sure if it's 100% accurate, but I can't remember it. The actual name that they use in psychology, as psychologists use to kind of weed out, like, for example, police candidates. At one time in my life, when I was in my 20s, I was going to be a police officer. I took my test and I took my psychology test, and I was an appointed police officer, but I resigned my position after, you know, discussions with my family about it, and just decided that I didn't want to do it. But there was, during that all that time I was doing that, I remember these tests that they were giving us, and they are able to determine if you are kind of favoring, you know, if you're pulling over somebody on a traffic stop, and you know, color. There are those tests, and I wish that maybe they would enhance that better, so that, you know, not all cops are bad. You know, my family's, a lot of them are police officers and firemen, and we don't have an ounce of racism in my family. Like, we're all, you know, we have this, we don't have that in our family. So I know that's, cops are not all bad guys, but there are bad apples. But I was wondering if, do you think maybe psychologists will be able to determine, and just, you know, is that true? Could it be just some people are just wired genetically like that, to just hate people because of whatever reason, of color, or, you know, where they're from, their culture, or their nationalities?
Yeah, that would all be a learned response. Hate is learned. From all the research that I've read, I have not seen anything other than some correlational research, which we know doesn't show causation, that shows that there's a genetic connection to hate. There can be temperament where people are more angry, and I guess that could be related to hate in some way. But they use what's called a thematic aptitude test. It's like 400 questions. It's a personality inventory, and it's the same test. But believe it or not, it's the same type of test if you go on a dating website. You know, as they're matching people up, it's the same type of test to try to weed out people who have characteristics that would not be socially desirable or socially acceptable. So yeah, they can do that and give that type of test. But I have not read any real credible stuff. And I mean, this isn't necessarily my, forte, but I do try to keep up on my reading. Um, I haven't found any credible evidence that it's genetic based. It's more environment, the social environment that you're in. You know, people who are raised in a home that hates, they tend to hate just because that's all they've been exposed to and they don't know anything else. And they don't even know it's wrong because that's all they've ever known. And it's not only with race, it can be with age, it can be with sex, it can be with anything. But yeah, I haven't read anything, and it wouldn't have been Zimbardo, but because Zimbardo's stuff is more on the the situation that you're in can make even good people do bad things. I don't know about color. I have to look back at that video. I don't remember anything that wasn't just correlational research, but I'll try to look and I'll let you know. Anybody else before I move on?
Well, I was just gonna say you touched on like the same thing Lorenzo said. Um, like when you were saying one person at a time, that's what I was wondering too, because like it definitely needs to change. But when you go to some parts, I mean, it's so deeply rooted that like when they're learned or like kids are raised to hate and then they have kids, they're gonna teach them the same thing. That's where it's like, where does it end type of thing when it's
That
that deeply rooted.
Yeah, and it's part of it. As part of this lecture, we talk about jigsaw in a classroom. A lot of this is done in schools now to try to break down those walls and break down those stereotypes by teachers purposely planning out the groups, not necessarily telling the students that they planned them out. They could come up with cutesy little ways that people end up being partners. But we found that if people work together toward a common goal, that's a real good start. That can break down a lot of stereotypes. If you have a particular neighborhood in your mind because you've heard so much this neighborhood is bad, but you've never been in that neighborhood, you don't know anybody personally from that neighborhood, that's a learned experience. And the only way you're going to get rid of that is when you start seeing images or meet people or visit that neighborhood and see and talk to the people in the neighborhood. That's the only way you're going to have a chance to break down those stereotypes. And that stereotype can just perpetuate itself to your family and your friends, et cetera, et cetera. So good discussion, everyone. Good discussion.
One more thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, about what you were just saying about like neighborhoods. That's something I also notice about living out here. Like a lot of the outskirt areas of Pittsburgh are like pretty much like in their own bubble. They have their own bubble. They don't realize, like stuff, like the real stuff that happens in the world. I remember I was dating a girl, and she went to go study abroad in Barcelona. When you go there, they tell you like keep a hold of your stuff, watch your stuff, make sure, so you won't get pickpocketed or someone steals something from you. So she wound up getting pickpocketed by someone and was so devastated by it, she didn't think that anything like that or anybody could ever do something like that to her. And it's just like it can happen anywhere. It can happen wherever you are. It doesn't matter where you are, it happens.
Yeah, it can happen in your own
a lot
neighborhood. Could be your own family.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like that, a lot of places out here are like in their own bubble.
We don't cross rivers.
Yeah.
446 bridges in Western Pennsylvania, but we don't cross bridges. Okay, so this is how these prejudice play out. We tend to look for commonalities, okay, and we call it the in-group, people who are like us, whatever you want to label like us, whether it's things you've heard about, things you've experienced, you call them the in-group. And you give a little more leeway to the in-group people. And then you have the out-group, the people that are different from you. They may look different, they may talk different, they may live in different neighborhoods, etc. But you also treat them differently and relate to them differently. When we talk about this in-group, out-group, everyone does it. We're all a little bit racist. We're all a little bit sexist. We're all a little bit ageist. The opportunity is there. Not everyone will fall into that pattern, but it is there, whether you know it or not. When we talk about, as I said, discrimination, the biggest thing when we talk about discrimination is it's something you typically can see. And if it can be seen, then it can be changed. Now, will it get changed? Not always, but it could get changed. When things are hidden, they don't get changed. So the more out open with anything, with any type of ism, racism, sexism, ageism, then we have a chance to change attitudes. When people are competing for scarce resources, when they're competing for jobs, when they're competing for people like in their lives, when they're competing for education, you know, there's a conflict. And that can play into or build on someone's stereotypes or prejudice that they already have. And sometimes that's when they come out more, when people were pushed. You may not know, as you mentioned, Nate, you may not know someone thinks a certain way until push comes to shove, something happens, and they don't have your back, and you thought they would. That can happen anytime, any place, with anybody, because we still can't see into their mind to know actually what they're thinking. But we can try our best to use what we have, to use the media, to use the environment, to use our education, to use the tools that we have to get people who think against whatever the typical stereotypes are and try to work to change them. I hope they'll be successful. But like I said, I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. And that's sad, but true. It's going to take decades for this to work out of the system. And will it always be perfect and happy? No, it's always going to have that possibility of being there because we can't control what someone else thinks. We can only control our reaction to whatever happens.
Ma'am,
Yes.
I don't understand what you just said about we all have a little bit of sexism, racism in us. I've heard that before, but I don't know what that means. Like,
The
you know,
possibility of being in a situation that could cause you to go against something that you believe is always there. That possibility is always there. Will it happen? Hopefully not. But if the situation is strong enough, remember I said, can, attitudes, when we talked about attitudes and behavior, can behavior change an attitude? Yes. If the situation is strong enough, it could change somebody's attitude. So the possibility is there for every single human. Will it happen? Not necessarily, but the possibility is there because the social situation could be so strong that someone may change their attitude about something because of something that happened to them or happened to some loved one of theirs. If that emotional connection is so strong, it can change a person's attitude. And even though they may have never felt racist or been in a racist situation or sexist or ageist, the possibility is there. And that's what I meant by that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, thank you.
Mhm. So, how do we combat prejudice? Increase awareness of things that we have more in common than we have differences. Find information that's inconsistent with those stereotypes and challenge that out group thing. Oh, all those people who live in Carrick are like this. All those people who live in Arlington are like this. All these people who live in Mount Lebanon are like this. Because anytime we do that, we just lump everyone together, just like my boss at Spencer's would lump all teenagers together. It's what people are used to, what they're familiar with. So if on TV you see all the time stories about a teenager who did this to some old lady and stole this from this store, and you see that every day, and you don't see anything that combats that, that shows the similarities or things that are positive things, you're just compounding that stereotype. So, working with media sources, social media now in particular, that's what we have to do. But it's so easy to get off on a tangent when we do like the social media issue. So jigsaw is one way I mentioned that's done in a classroom where we group different people from different neighborhoods, maybe different ability levels, to try to break down some of those stereotypes. Attribution. An attribution is an explanation or a cause of an event or behavior. So we all make attributions. What caused a particular behavior? We decide, was it something about that person? That would be an internal attribution, something about the disposition. They're lazy, they're unintelligent, they're some sort of internal thing that they have no control over. Or is it external? It's some sort of situation. So let me give you an example. And I'm going to show you how it would be very easy for anybody, even me, who knows this, can fall into this. So again, I meet a friend all the time for lunch, and she's late every single time, every time. And one day she's late, and I'm sitting there eating breadsticks for like 20 minutes, and she's still not there. And I'm thinking, she's always late. She's always late. She's always late. And she comes in, and she's 25 minutes late, and she says to me, there was an accident in the Liberty tunnels, and I got stuck, and I was a spot where I couldn't use my phone, and I'm so sorry I'm late. And I'm still thinking in the back of my mind, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're late. Yeah, you would have been late for your own funeral. And then driving home, I heard on the news that there was an accident in the Liberty tunnels, and traffic was tied up for a half hour. People couldn't get anywhere. And it was like, oh my gosh, I just did what I teach people not to do. I just made an attribution that because she had that past, those characteristics, I automatically assumed that the reason she was late was because of her just being lazy, running late, any of the above. Not that there truly was a situation. So even someone who knows this stuff can fall into the trap. So it's being aware of why we think what we think. And the main thing is called the fundamental attribution error. And depending on which textbook you have, they also call it corresponding bias. It's the exact same thing. They just changed the terminology. So the fundamental attribution error is when we blame things on that out group, people who are different than us, on characteristics that are like flawed, like they're lazy or they're stupid or whatever. But people who are in our in group, who are like us, who would never do something like that, we say it's the situation. And we all have the capacity to make that fundamental attribution error.
May I say something?
Yep.
That's something. Now, y'all are just tearing my topic paper apart because discrimination was my subject, and I think I might have to change it.
Okay.
But what you just explained about attributional biases, the in versus the out. I'm Black, and it's look, I apologize, charged it to my head, not my heart. But even though we have issues being accepted or regarded with respect, just plain human decency from other races, not even just Caucasians, but Asians and any other Aboriginal, or any other original culture, whatever the case might be. We still have those same issues with us as well. So it's like the old saying is, this whole issue is old as old can be. How are we going to expect people to treat us a certain way when we still treat ourselves, with conditions? We put conditions on ourselves, so like I definitely, I just wanted to say that because it's important.
And it is. And there was a research study that was fascinating. I can't remember the researcher right off the top of my head, but what they did, they used facial images and they gave the test to all different nationalities, but they were pictures of Black and white people, and you had 1 second to push a button, positive or a negative, and they used different words instead of positive or negative.
Yeah.
And they found that even people who were looking at their own race rated their own race negatively more than you would have thought they would have. It was really scary. It said unintelligent, and even though they were the same race, they still rated people who were white higher than people who were Black or Native American. You know what I mean? And it's just everywhere. And the only thing we can do is try, as you said, to find a starting place. I think we found a starting place, but that's all it is. It's starting place. It's not something that's going to change overnight. It hasn't, but it is. It's a very emotional topic. It's a very sensitive topic, and it's a very, very current topic. And a lot of people are afraid to talk about it because they don't know the kind of reaction they may get. So thank you for sharing. And we're not trying to take your topic, really, honestly. Okay, self-serving bias. That also is something that we see in research, that we all have a little bit of a self-serving bias that we may not even be aware of. I don't know how many of you have ever read the book Diary of Anne Frank, but in the Diary of Anne Frank, They're hiding from the Nazis in this upper room, and this woman, Meep, has been giving them food and things. And once a year, she would make a birthday cake so they could all celebrate their birthdays. Now, remember, these people have been living in this upper room. They're not allowed to make any movements or anything during the day. So this birthday cake is a special thing. Meep had to save all her sugar rations for like a month to be able to make this birthday cake. And they're getting ready to cut the cake, and this woman, Mrs. Van Dam, goes to cut the cake, and Mrs. Frank stops her. Oh no, you're not cutting the cake. Mr. Frank's going to cut the cake. It's like, why? Why can't I cut the cake? And Mrs. Frank goes, because you always make yours and your husband's piece just a little bigger. And she wasn't even aware that she was doing it. That self-serving bias can come out when we're not even aware that we're doing it. And that idea of a belief in a just world, I hate to break it to you. I think you've kind of heard it tonight, but bad things happen to good people. Some people don't think that. Some people honestly believe that if something bad happened to you, you must have done something to deserve it. I'm here to break that notion. Bad things happen to good people. They did nothing wrong. Something bad still happened to them. But when you have a lot of people that think that way, and the research shows there are a lot of people that think that way, they're always going to be putting down somebody, be condescending, to be short, to say, oh yeah, it's your fault, because of their view of the world, because they truly don't think if you're a good person, that can't happen to you, because it's probably never happened to them. If it would happen to them, they may change their attitude or they may not. They may blame it on the situation. And we talked about blaming the victim. Now let's do something positive for just a minute here, because social psychology right now sounds very dark and depressing, and not everything in social psychology is dark and depressing. So how do we like people? Well, having contact with people helps. I mean, we've just been together, this is our 4th week, and I feel like I know you a little bit. I mean, I can't say I know a lot about you. I didn't have the interaction that we would have like in a regular classroom, but many of you have stayed on it or have come on my office hours, or have emailed me or texted me. So, I have a little bit of an understanding, that helps. The more you're around someone, the greater chance you have of possibly liking them. Just repeated contact, looking for things that are similar. You both like going to the movies. You both like the Pirates. You both like hiking or being in the outdoors, or you enjoy working at the food bank and distributing food. I mean, you have some similarities with the person can help. And then, of course, yeah, if it's going to go toward more of a relationship other than just a friendship, physical attraction. There are different things that you look for. Some people like people with blonde hair. Some people like people with dark hair. Some people like people who are bald. I mean, each person has their own thing that they are physically attracted to, but physical attraction can aid in liking somebody. And even to the person that goes beyond that, to loving someone more than just liking someone. Remember when we talked a little bit about intelligence. We talked about Sternberg's triangular model of intelligence, his triarctic theory. Well, he has a triangular model of love. And he talks about the different types of loves. There's passionate, which is sex, and companionate, your best friend. It's a different type of love. And sometimes they're both the same. The person who you are passionate about is also the person who's your companion. So his theory is that these three components make the different types of love. So in psychology, passion is sex. So passion is that sexual desire, whether you want to call it lust or intimacy is relationship. Intimacy is not sex when we're talking about psychology. It's, are you willing to share your thoughts, your hopes, your dreams, your ideas with someone? That you're willing to share part of yourself. That would be intimacy. And then commitment is, are you willing to be there for that person no matter what? And an example to try to help this stick, like passion may be, it's Saturday night, you're in the bar, it's 10 o'clock, you look around and go, wow, pickings are pretty slim. Can I have a drink, bartender? I'll take a Long Island iced tea, which has like 4 or 5 shots of alcohol. And a half hour later, you look around, still doesn't look any prospects here. Give me another drink. And after a few drinks, you look around the room and they say, over there, oh, bartender, can you send some drinks over there to that table? And then you eventually mosey over to that table and you find someone, and you may even go home with that person and may even have the walk of shame the next day. Hey, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that.
So when we talk about just sex, that relationship isn't necessarily going to go any further than just that night or that encounter or maybe a couple days. It may not go any further. It would just stay at passion. Now, it could develop into more as you spend more time together. You start to share your thoughts, your hopes, your dreams, your feelings. You start to be concerned for that person. That would be intimacy. And then commitment. That doesn't necessarily mean marriage in the traditional sense. When his research was done, that's what he was talking about. But commitment is being there for that person in good times and bad times, and working through everything that may be going on. Some people stay together in a relationship. They have no passion, so there's no sex. They don't even talk to each other, let alone have any type of intimacy, but they stay together for the kids. And as soon as the kids are going to move out, they get a divorce. They would have just commitment, but those other two types of love would be missing from their life. So Sternberg says all people have some combination, if they're in a relationship with someone, either a single one of these or a combination. And if you happen to have all three, he calls that consummate love. It's the best you can have. But he says most people don't have that, or if they do have it, it doesn't necessarily last as all three components always for the rest of their relationship. There may be times there's no intimacy. There may be times there's no passion. That doesn't mean the relationship doesn't exist. It just means not all the components are there always at the same time. And the attachment style that we talked about a couple slides ago when we talked about attachment, secure attachment, avoidant attachment. The attachment style you had as a child is the attachment style you have as an adult. So if you had a secure attachment as the child, 95% of the time, you will have a secure attachment in relationships in your adulthood. If you had an avoidant attachment style as a child and you never built a secure attachment with anyone, you're going to have an avoidant attachment style as an adult. So that's why when you do your extra credit on Harry Harlow, that's important to look at his research because some of his research is going to play back to us. And there is some evolutionary theorists that say our mating preference is the reason why we like a certain build or a certain characteristics of physical attractiveness may be based on genetics and on what may have been passed down genetically, why we look for a person who looks like this or that, etc. And the social exchange theory, when it comes to relationship and loving, the more we interconnect with people, the more we interact with people, the more we open ourselves and become willing for the relationship to possibly fail. That means being yourself. For that to happen, you first have to know who you are. Many times people get into relationships and they try to be what the other person wants them to be. And that relationship will fail over time. But if you're willing to be yourself, you're willing to show who you are to this other person, you have a better chance of that relationship lasting a lifetime. If you talk to people who have been married for like 75 years and you ask them, how did you do it? Their number one answer is have a good sense of humor and never go to bed angry. Because if you look at any issue can be talked through. You might not get what you want, but it can be discussed and talked through. And a lot of people were afraid, both men and women. And it doesn't matter if it's a heterosexual or a homosexual relationship. People still need that feeling of commitment and compassion, and a compassionate way of talking to someone you love means being open to listening to them. Some people aren't opening themselves to listen to somebody else because they don't even listen to themselves. Social organizations, sorry, I can do this. We got a couple more to go. People act differently many times in a group because you're de-individualized. That means because the responsibility can be spread out among people, sometimes people will react and act differently. I'm sure you've heard of the term herd mentality. Sometimes people just go along with the group, even though it may be something they would never have done all by themselves. There are social norms that are many times unwritten. For everyone tonight who has their camera on, I'd like to thank you for not being naked. right? That's a social norm. I don't think it's written anywhere in CCAC's handbook that you can't be naked. Glad you didn't do it though, right? There's certain unwritten things that if somebody breaks one of those norms, they make it known pretty quickly. So if you already watched the Power of the Situation video, you already saw these couple experiments. If you didn't, you're going to see these actual experiments on that video. That's the video you need to watch. Number 19, The Power of the Situation. The first one then is the Zimbardo study. Philip Zimbardo was at Stanford, and in the 70s, he did the Stanford prison experiment. And people said, well, why, it's 50 years ago, why do you still study it? Because the same pattern that we saw 50 years ago, we are still seeing today. So, a couple years ago, there was an incident in the military where a female soldier had her picture taken with two prisoners who had bags over their heads that were completely naked. And other members of that particular troop also did, but somehow that picture leaked to the to Newsweek, and they put it on their front cover, of course, with little blocks, covering private areas. But they put her picture, not anybody else's. And people were like, well, how could you do this? Why would, and her parents were like mortified. Oh my gosh, we didn't raise our child to be like this. And when she was asked, she's like, I don't know. I didn't think anything of it. Everyone did it. All of us. My commanding officer was right there and did it. Sometimes the situation is so strong, even though it's something we typically would not have done in another situation, we still may do it. Sometimes we conform. Sometimes we conform because of information that we've been told. Sometimes it's because of the norms. People around us are all doing it and they're putting pressure on you to do it. So you do that also. We tend to do things if we have at least one other person backing us up. There are many people who can do something just because it's them and they have that strong enough willpower and sense of who they are to do it. But many times people will yield to the group. If they're the only one that thinks differently, they think, maybe there's something wrong. But if there's at least one other person who thinks like them, they may not conform. So in the video, you're going to see the Solomon Asch study. That's this one, where this gentleman is actually the subject. All the rest of the people here are on the research team. The subject believed that it was a study on visual acuity. In reality, it was a study on conformity. And the research team were going along with everyone. And they said, okay, this is the same size as this. And everyone agreed. And then something strange happened. All of a sudden, they said a different line matched. And the subject is like, It's amazing that people would conform thinking, well, maybe the group is right. 90% of the people conformed at least one time. 90%, at least one time. And the ones that didn't conform said it was, well, I kind of felt awkward not going along with the group. I felt like I should have gone along with the group. So you're going to see that on the video. There are 6 rules of compliance. I'm going to make it. The voice is really going now. If you like someone or you're friends with someone, you tend to do what they may ask you. So you're at home in your nice warm bed on a snowy night, and a friend calls you and asks you to pick them up because their car died. If they're your friend, you're probably going to get in your car and go get them. If there's someone you're not necessarily more than an acquaintance with, you may say, no, I'm not getting out of my bed, find somebody else. If you've made a commitment and people know about that and you want to be consistent, let's think about the story I talked about with the girl collecting the bottles because of her office not recycling. What happened if one day you threw the bottles just in the trash and everyone saw you? They'd be like, hey, wow, wait, you're being a hypocrite, right? So you may do something just to be consistent. Scarcity. I don't know if any of you have ever seen those Macy's ads and those sale ads. Well, those ads say, hey, it's a one-day sale, when really it's a 2-day sale. If you think about it, it's Friday and Saturday, but they call it a preview day. That's not a one-day sale, that's a 2-day sale. But we all hear one-day sale and we think we only have one day. Scarcity, it makes people want to go. Reciprocity. Anybody who works in an office or with a group of workers now may have had this experience. It's the you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You come in, your kid is selling Sarah's candy bars. Somebody else's kid is selling magazines. You buy a magazine off of them. You say, hey, would you like to buy some candy bars for my, son? And no, I don't want to buy any candy bars. What do you mean? I bought a magazine off of you. You should be buying. No, I'm on a diet. Give it to somebody else. You should buy. See, reciprocity. People even expect you to do that. If you haven't experienced that yet, just wait. It happens everywhere eventually. Social validation. Any of those buildings you see with names on it, every time you say that name. So let's say, Heinz Field, they pay $57 million for the rights to call it Heinz Field. But every time you say Heinz Field, you're validating Heinz. You're validating that company. So social validation might be why we do something. And authority figures. What an authority figure says, many times that's what we do. Even if it's something we may not agree with, we may do it anyway because of complying to what an authority says. There are 3 techniques that are used in the sale industry. So you want to know these 3 techniques: foot and door, low ball technique, and door and face. And I'm going to give you an example of each. Foot and door. So a friend misses class and asked you for their notes, your notes to give to them. And you're like, oh, okay. And then the next week they miss class and ask, hey, can I borrow your notes again? I missed class. So you've already said yes once. It's much harder to say no the next time. So that's like the foot and door technique. The low ball technique, let's use a nice, easy number example. Let's say you're buying a used car and it costs $10,000, but you want to get some things added to it, but you didn't really want to get those things added to it. You're with a salesperson and they say, hey, we can add like a little bit of tint on the front top of the front window. You said that you travel to uh, Monroeville, the Parkway East, every morning with your kids to take them to your mom's house, and that sun is just really, really bad. You wouldn't want to be blinded by the sun when you're taking your kids in the morning. And you're like, "Oh, of course not. Well, how much would that cost? Oh, $1,000. $1,000. Okay. And the next thing you know, they're going through all these things you need, and you add to it, and the next thing your car is like $15,000. That's the low ball technique. They come in low and add to it. And if you've ever been in the sales industry, and I will talk from the Macy's standpoint, from working there for years, they use it all the time. It's called upselling, and most stores do it. If you sell a pair of jeans, you try to get them to buy a shirt to go with it. If they buy a pair of shoes, you try to get them to get matching socks. It's called upselling. That's the low ball technique. You start with a low amount and you try to increase that. And the last one is the door and face technique. And that's when you start with something you know that they're going to say no to, and then come back with something you think they'll say yes to because they feel bad because they said something like no. So, an example, say your brother or sister ask you if you can babysit their kids the entire weekend. And you say, no, I'm not giving up my weekend, the entire weekend, to watch your kids. Okay, I know that was unfair. We just haven't had any time. Could you watch them just Friday night for about 5 hours, please? And you say, okay, I'll watch them for 5 hours. Well, they didn't expect you to say yes to the whole weekend. They wanted the 5 hours on Friday, but they set the stage so you would say yes by making you feel bad that you already said no. Another example of that would be, hey, my son is selling these lottery tickets for school. It's $100 for the month, and you can win every day. And I don't have $100 for a lottery ticket. Oh, yeah, I know they've been really hard for us to sell. But he's also selling Sarah's candy bars. They're $2 a bar. Could you buy a couple of those? Sure, I'll take 5. They just sold you 5 candy bars. They didn't expect you to get the raffle ticket, but you felt bad and you thought, well, this is only $10 instead of 100. Yeah, I'll get 5 candy bars. Works all the time. Stanley Milgram. And you'll see the video on this. Watch it very closely when you do. Stanley Milgram was looking for, conformity. People were hired to be the teacher. The learner was part of the research team, so no shocks were actually given. But the teacher was believed that every time he pushed the button, he was actually shocking the person. And it went from 15 volts, which is just a little square battery, to 450 volts that could kill a person. And every time the learner got a pairing, they used word pairs wrong, the teacher was instructed to shock the learner into improving their memory. And they couldn't just stay with like 15 volts. If they missed again, they had to go up to 30 volts, and then they had to go to 45 volts, all the way up the scale. And what they did was set up a recording on the other side. So the teacher really thought they were shocking the person, but actually it was standardized that at a certain point, he would yell this, hey, my heart is hurting, I have a heart condition. At certain point, it'd be pounding on the wall. And at one point, they didn't say anything. So you didn't know if the person was dead or not. And in the video, you'll see, and the one part, the guy literally turns to the researcher and says, should we check on him or that? And the researcher goes, no, continue, teacher. And he says to him, well, if you take responsibility for it, zap. See, he just gave responsibility. If something happened to that guy, it wasn't his fault. It was the researcher's fault. How far would people go? Educated psychiatrists predicted that only 2% of the people would shock up through 450 volts. In reality, 2/3, 65%. 65% of the people went up to 450 volts. What does that say about human nature? Again, conformity. The authority figure told them to do it, and they did it. And what's the interesting thing is, even when it was over or people quit, nobody asked or just went. It's like, can I please go check on them? That was okay, but nobody did. Nobody asked until it was over. Almost done. So we've all been in groups. You know what the majority win rule is in it. Okay, how many people want to go to lunch? Okay, whoever most is, that's what we do, right? Truth wins. That's pretty obvious. Once you believe something's true, then you go with that if you believe it's true. Group polarization, that can happen also. You got half the people on one side, half the other. Not easy to come together. Think about Congress sometimes, how hard it is to get them all to agree. And when you have that polarization, people not willing to work together, not willing to negotiate, nothing gets done. And that can happen in any group, whether it's a family group, whether it's a school, whether it's a business, whether it's a government. You have to find some common ground in order to get things to work. And sometimes in some groups, we have what's called groupthink. The group takes on its own personality and its own mentality, and nothing anyone else says matters. I'm going to give an example, and I don't know what your feelings are about vaccines, the vaccines or anything, but I'll never forget this person calling me at Kennywood saying, well, I'm not wearing a mask. I'm like, well, right now we still have a mask mandate unless you're fully vaccinated. Well, I'm not getting the vaccine because I saw on the news that a guy took the vaccine and his heart turned to crystal and exploded. And if you could have seen my face, what? Like where did you? Well, that's what everyone told me. Okay, who's everyone? Well, everyone. No, who's everyone? Because you get this group think going. Everyone thinks the same way, and no one can tell anyone any different. And it happens all the time also. Heterogeneous versus homogeneous groups. Heterogeneous groups are people who think differently. They are much better groups. They take longer to come to agreement or consensus, but they're much better groups because everyone makes concessions, but everyone also gets a little bit of something. Homogeneous groups are people who all think the same way. That sometimes can lead to that in-group, out-group mentality, where you start believing that everyone who's not like you, who doesn't think like you, there's something wrong with them. So you have to watch that in groups. Again, heterogeneous, better grouping, but takes longer to get a decision. This group, they all think alike. They're going to have that decision in a minute, but it only means one point of view is being represented. In a group, you can have social loafing. When we talk about social loafing, there's two aspects. There's the one where if you've ever been in a group and somebody didn't do their part and somebody else had to pick up the slack, that's one way it's social loafing. But also, let's say right now I said to you that before you can leave tonight, I'm going to put you in groups of 5 and all of you have to, write a 5-page paper after you got done beating me with a stick. That would be hard to write a 5-page paper and, tonight without having any prep, right? Versus if I said, well, you as a group of 5 can work together and write one 5-page paper. Each of you could write 1 page and turn it in. That's social loafing. You did less work in a group than you did if you would have had to do it by yourself. And if you've ever been a facilitator of a group, if you've ever been the person in charge to try to get a group to talk or to make discussion and make agreement and change things and try to work together, social facilitation can be difficult. Altruism and pro-social behavior are very, very similar. In altruism, an altruistic person does good things but wants no credit for them. So if you've ever heard the story at Christmas, the red kettles that they have for the Salvation Army, every now and then you'll hear about somebody who dropped like a diamond ring in there or a gold coin that's worth, $40,000. That would be an altruistic act. They did it for something good, but they weren't going to get any credit for it. Pro-social behavior can or cannot, either way, possibly get credit for it. That means you have the tendency to do positive things for other people in society. And you should know who Kitty Genevieve was. Kitty Genevieve is the story that actually gave New York its bad reputation for being uncaring and unfeeling. And again, this would have been before 9/11. Kitty Genevieve was coming home from work and she got off a bus and it was in the middle of summer, so people had their windows open and she got attacked and she screamed for help over and over again. And no one helped her. I mean, people actually closed their windows. No one called the police. Well, that's not true. Somebody called 911, but when they got the 911 operator, they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it was a mistake," and hung up. She got away from the attacker, but he managed to get caught up with her and he killed her on her apartment steps. If just one person may have called or tried to help. And when they interviewed people, people said, well, I didn't showing help. I'm older. I'm not fit. I don't want to get hurt. I have kids. I can't just leave my apartment. I didn't want to get involved. Who knows what was they came up with all these different reasons for not helping. And we call this the bystander effect. The more people there are around in a situation, the less likely any one person's going to help. So if we were all in a classroom and I had a heart attack, it would take a classroom of people longer to react, either to call to get help, to come up and help me, than if there was only one person in the room. Because the responsibility falls just on that one person. And when you watch the video, part of the situation, that's the one on the beach. It's showing that a person had their radio and walked away, and somebody came up and stole it, and nobody said anything. But when the girl asked the gentleman, "Hey, I'm going to just go up to the stand. Can you watch my radio?" That personal bond was formed. Somebody goes to steal her radio, and that guy goes after the guy. Anytime there's more than one person in a situation, it can actually slow the situation down. And if you think this is just New York, it's not only just New York. It happened on Wood Street about 10 years ago. There was a drive-by shooting. Young man was shot right in front of what's now Point Park Library. It's a bus stop. People went running. There was a bus sitting there. Buses have phones in them. This is, before everyone would have had a lot of cell phones, but most people would have had them. A woman who was a nurse, about 5 cars back of the person who did the shooting, pulled her car over and went to help this kid. So it can happen anywhere, not just in New York. And when people were asked, well, I had to go to class. I couldn't do it. I'm older. What if they shot me? Even the bus driver didn't call for help. So the more people around, the less likely any one person is going to act. That diffusion of responsibility, being apprehensive about why you're doing it, etc. Okay, I have one last thing, and then you're done for lecture. I'll upload that video, and you'll be able to. I'm just excited. My voice made it this long. You'll be able to watch the second half of the lecture, and I'll send you the test as soon as I finish this last section. So I told you I wanted to look at a couple commercials. Okay, let me get to. All right, just a minute here. It's just a few, but they can make the point very well. So I'm not trying to sell you anything, any type of product here. So don't get upset if you think I'm trying to sell you anything. Anybody have any questions while we're waiting for YouTube for some reason to load, since it's taking its good old time?
For the test,
Mm-hmm.
is it on stuff we did last week, or does it include?
No, it's
this
just
one?
tonight's lecture and the lecture you're going to watch. So it's only on human growth and development, which is what I filmed, and on the social psychology that we just did. That's all it's on.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so Budweiser, and again, not trying to sell their beer, but Budweiser has received so many awards for some of their commercials. So let's see if this one will load. So I'm sure you've seen them. They have a puppy and they have the Clydesdale, and the Clydesdale was already programmed. It's already been ingrained in people's memory over the years based on, previous commercials with Budweiser. We have the Clydesdale horses already something that's connected. And they also had dogs connected before, but it was always a Dalmatian. And I don't know why it's so slow today. We only have 2 to watch, and of course. Okay, I'm gonna try. Boom. If it doesn't work, I will also send you the links for the 2 commercials. Trying. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to be sending you the links for the 2 commercials also. So the first commercial was the Budweiser commercial, and it uses the peripheral method. In other words, there's no beer anywhere in the commercial. It's a puppy who was raised on this farm, and the woman sells the puppies. And the gentleman next to them trains horses, and he trains the Clydesdales. And this one little puppy keeps escaping to go visit the one horse, even to the point that the horse and the little puppy kiss, like kisses its nose. And you can see that there's this connection between the puppy and the horse. And this is the last puppy. It keeps escaping. It comes over in the rain. It keeps coming over to see this horse. And at the end, she sells this puppy, and the guy's going to drive away with this puppy. And the Clydesdale hops the fence, and Clydesdales are huge. So you can just imagine how much training it took to get a Clydesdale to hop a fence, and goes running after this puppy, and gets his other friends, the Clydesdales, to come and stop the car to bring back this puppy. And the guy's real happy because the puppies come back and the horse is happy. And at the end, there's the Budweiser label, and it says best #BestBuds. There's no beer anywhere in the commercial. But that's their beer ad for the Super Bowl. It was the #1 ad. And the next year, they took that same puppy, even though it would have been a year older, but they just substituted another puppy that looked the same as the first one. And the puppy ran away. And they showed a picture of the puppy poster lost. That was the picture of the puppy kissing the horse. So now that's been encoded already for a year in people's heads. So they've now just made that connection. And eventually the puppy finds its way home. A wolf is out to get it. The Clydesdales break out of the barn and save the puppy from the wolf. And the puppy and the horses come running back, and the guy is wiping off the puppy. And in that one, you can actually see a bottle of beer. A bottle of beer. That's it. No other beer in the commercial. That also won the #1 commercial. They spent $6 million on that 59-second commercial. But they got their money's worth. Who was that commercial for? Everyone. It had music, it had animals, people love dogs, people love horses, men, women, all different ages. People who like beer, people who like Budweiser. And it was also for children, because children like puppies and horses. So they were primed. Someday they're going to be a beer drinker. And you've just primed Budweiser into their head. The second commercial that I would have showed, and you should watch because it's kind of scary. It's a band commercial. It was only shown one time and was shown on the Super Bowl. And it's called Dog Suicide. It's Bridgestone tires. And it's one of the few things ever in my life that I've called a company about and just went schizo over. And so did thousands of other psychologists. And that's why it was banned. And it's about a dog who sees his girlfriend dog having sex with another dog. Except they're not having sex doggy style, they're having sex like humans. And the dog is like, drops these bones he had as a gift for her, and he runs onto the freeway, and he's standing at the edge of the freeway contemplating, should he jump into traffic that's whizzing by? And he closes his eyes and he sees the picture in his mind of his girlfriend having sex with this other dog, and he decides to jump into oncoming traffic. And luckily, the Bridgestone tires stop the car before he gets killed. That's the central route because it's showing the tires work. But what else is being primed? Oh, well, you know, if your girlfriend or your boyfriend cheats on you, you might as well just end it all and, you know, kill yourself because, you know, there's just nothing worth living for after that. And since the dogs are having sex like humans, people are going to compare that in their mind. And no, that may not mean that every single person who sees that's going to just go kill themselves. But even if just one person would, that's something you can't do and be a good, responsible company. So that ad was pulled. And it got more comments from, like I said, physicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, just in general. And people laugh. You might even laugh when you watch it until that moment when you don't know if the dog's going to die or not. So I will send you the 2 links to those commercials also so you can watch them. Does anybody have any questions? You all understand what I'm going to do now?
I have a question.
Okay.
About the activities. So last week we had the activity on pegword and the activity on the learning video, the video on learning. So what about this week?
You don't have any this week because you have your research paper due next week.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't schedule any for this week other than to watch The Power of the Situation. That was required because you're being tested on it.
Okay.
Okay. That's video number 19 on learner.org. But I think I have the actual link on Blackboard.
So the video on learning, was it only just to watch or just to summarize?
All the videos that I tell you you have to watch, you're supposed to give me 4 to 6 sentences on something that you learned.
Okay.
Okay, that's the activity with all the videos that I say, watch this video, 4 to 6 sentences about something you learned.
And what to do with the peg words?
Peg words you just had to know. They were extra credit, remember last time? So you just had to do the activity. You didn't actually have to write about it in your journal.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so as soon as I get off of this Zoom, I'm going to email you the test. Please make sure you check to see that you got the test. If you didn't get the test, like I said, it's going to take what, 5 minutes for me to do that. Send me an email and I will attach the test and the answer sheet. You have until Sunday evening to get that test done. Again, it's on the honor system. It's just on the human growth and on the social psychology. As soon as I send you the test, I will start uploading that video to YouTube, and then I will send you the next video as a link. I'll also post it on Blackboard. That may take a little longer because, well, it depends on how many people were uploading videos to YouTube, how long it takes. Last week, it took me close to an hour to upload the video. So hopefully it won't be as long since it's not as long of a video. Yes, Alexandra.
Hi. So do we need to write responses to the commercials that you are sending us to watch?
No,
Okay.
I'm just sending them. So you would have seen them in class, but since for some reason it's not, YouTube's not loading, I'm not
No,
going
just,
to hang
just
around.
where, yeah, just where it is in the syllabus. I just wanted to make sure because it's
Yeah.
underneath the same video 19. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, just watch video 19 and you'll be good.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, paper due next week. So again, the paper will be due Tuesday by midnight. Okay, the lectures from next week's class, and hopefully I will have a voice that makes it the whole time next time. But I've already filmed those lectures for the people who may need the time to finish their paper instead of watching class. You would still get the material from the class. They're already filmed, and I think I have them open on Blackboard already. If not, I just have to open them, but they've been filmed already. So if you don't show up for class, I'm not going to hunt you down. Just make sure I have that paper. But I will be doing all 3 of those lectures. They're short. 2 of them are 16 slides and 1 is 20 slides. So, and then the following week will be the test and your presentations, and then you're done. Have a good night. Like I said, I'll send that to you as soon as nobody has any questions. So just make sure you check your email in about 5-10 minutes tops.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Actually, I did have a quick question.
Okay.
For like all the videos on the learning.org, I've kind of been like, I guess summarizing them kind of. Is that what you want? Or
Yeah, I just wanted you to tell me something you learned. So you could summarize what you saw. You could just focus on one particular aspect. You know, if you found something, say you found the Zimbardo prison study really fascinating, you could just talk about that. It tells me you watched the video because this is
Okay.
class participation. We normally, if we were in a classroom, you would have actually watched the video in class. But it seems kind of stupid to do it on Zoom when you could watch it by yourself whenever you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wouldn't have to go back and redo.
Nope. No, you don't have to go back and redo them. You're good.
All right. Good evening.
Take care. Colton, do you have a question?
Oh, no, I was waiting to see if your email came in or not.
Well, I have to get off of Zoom to send the email.
Oh, okay. My bad. I must have missed that part.
That's
Sorry.
okay.
Well, have a good night.
Take care.